Press all these buttons. Okay, so the statement, now this is doing the recording, you boys are the 4% cream of Newcastle. What influence or impact has that statement had on you?
I think that I was a boy who was responsive to that idea that I was perhaps part of an elite, and I've always been kind of pleased that I went to the school which was considered by its headmaster to be the 4% cream of Newcastle. So I think it has had an influence on me, and I'm reluctant to use the word pride, but the feeling of this was a good thing to do. This was a right and proper way to conduct your life, to be part of the intellectual or intelligent and responsible part of the community.
Did you feel that at the time as a young boy, because you were fairly young when you went to school?
No, I
Did
didn't.
you fully...
I felt the pride of exclusivity, if you want to call it that, but that of course was represented in the school cap and the school badge, and the fact that when you went to the inter-school sports you were part of Newcastle Boys High School. And that's silly in a way, but all these years later, the name of the school does awake from the dead. You remember it forever. It was a very important thing.
So when and why did you become involved with the Newcastle Boys High School Old Boys Association?
Well, there was an attempt about the time I changed from engineering to architecture. There was an attempt here in Newcastle to start an old boys association, but it failed. Whoever was behind it didn't have the right clout, didn't push hard enough. But when I was living in Melbourne, my old friend Mervyn Cooper, who I've mentioned this before, wrote to me and said, "Did you know that they've started a new Old Boys Association? Do you want to join it? If you do, here's what you do." And so I wrote to the name he gave me, which I can't remember who that was now, and in due course got a form, and the form told me that for $10 a year or $50, for $10 a year I could be a member. For $50, I think it was, I could be a life member. So I'm all in favour of things like that, so I don't have to think about it anymore. So I paid them $50. I came to Newcastle while my house here was being built in 1991, and went to the school dinner at that time, and it took a little while at the first school dinner to find anybody I knew, because they all looked like funny old men, just as I did myself. And then being newly retired, with the interest in the school, which had always been with me, the idea of being on the committee of the Old Boys Association appealed to me, and so I went to the annual general meeting the following year, which would have been, I suppose, about June or thereabouts. I can't remember now, and became a member of the committee, and shortly after that became the secretary, and I was the secretary for 7 years. Once we were in the job, it was hard to get out of it.
Well, secretary is a job that generally people let others do because they seem to be the most amount of work.
Yeah.
At that or treasurer?
Yeah. Yes, that's quite right. Usually you find that an accountant will take up the treasurer's job when he's been pushed hard enough.
So you were quite happy, though, to do that?
Yes, I was. I'd a thing that hasn't been mentioned because it the other side of things. But for about 15 of my years of my time while I was in Melbourne, I got to be quite active in the work of the Institute of Architects.
Yes.
And I was on a number of committees, and even though the Institute of Architects has a paid administrative staff, a lot of the committees are run individually.
Yeah.
And so I took on the job as secretary and got used to being a secretary. And so when the time came here, secretary was the obvious. If I wanted to do a job, then secretary was the obvious job for me to do.
We've become very organised.
Yeah, I think it is. Well, you know how to organise things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So when you have like the old boys' dinners, are there certain traditions that you follow at the dinner?
Well, there's certainly a format for the dinners.
Yeah.
Yes, so you arrive at the dinner, and the drinks are being served, and served is perhaps a rather glamorous word for it, but the drinks are available in the bar and the city hall there, and then at usually about 7:15, an announcement's made that you're to go into your table. The tables, obviously there's a table plan, and the people are allocated to their position at table by their year of graduation. And the president of for the time then stands up and gives a little talk about it, and we sing the school song. Oh, yes, we sing the school song. Then there's always a resident priest of some kind, some denomination there, and so he's run in to give a
Saying grace?
grace. Thank you. I don't know why that word disappeared from me. That's then to say grace, and that usually is a specially written grace that has something to do with the school. Then we all get eating and talking, and at the end of the main course there's a speaker, and the speaker is always an old boy at the school, and they try now, we used to try, to get somebody who had done something interesting and who also had the ability to give a good talk. And sometimes we scored and other times we didn't. But there were, I mean, again, you'd expect it from Boys High, from this, that it did produce people who had done interesting things, and it did produce people who knew how to talk in public.
And can you remember any of those speakers in particular that you found most interesting?
Well, yes. A student who was a couple of years behind me at school named Charles Graham, who I knew at school. He rose to be in a very senior position in the ABC, and he also had spent a life involved in the fringe of the theatrical world, and he gave a very good and entertaining talk. Ross Gittins, from the Sydney Herald, is an old boy, and he gave us an interesting talk too. And that's about all that occurs to me now. I didn't go to I didn't go to the dinner last year. It's the first one I missed, and I think that it was just circumstances of my life.
Yeah.
I wasn't happy at that time.
No. Well, it's, I think, hard. I find it hard going to get-togethers like that.
Yeah.
They can bring up good memories and bad memories,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
you've got to be in the right mind to be there. What how do you think that Newcastle Boys High School had an effect on the town of Newcastle? Big general question there.
Oh, yes. Yes.
How?
Well, because boys who were brought up, a number of them, ended up in positions of considerable authority. And so they did have an effect. And of course, the other thing is that in those days, when I graduated, the most accessible tertiary activity for any boy whose parents were not wealthy was to get a teacher's college scholarship. And so a great many, we used to make the joke that it wasn't really a joke, it was really the truth, that out of every graduating year at Boys High, about 50% went to teachers' college, about 49% went as cadets to the BHP, and about 1% did other things. And so, another case, you see, my contemporary, a friend of mine at school, David Rice, rose to be a very senior officer and retired from that position in BHP. Deputy general manager or something way up at the top. I only saw him once or twice after he achieved that ring. He was in Melbourne when I was in Melbourne. So I think that the school can be very proud of what it's done for Newcastle, for New South Wales, and hence for Australia. A good thing, Newcastle Boys High School, and it's an absolute damn disgrace that it was closed down in 1978 by stupid politics.
You think that there is a need? I mean, they do have selective high schools now, but this was a selective high school that was a boys' school.
Yeah.
Do you think that still has a certain place? We do have a selective high school, but it's co-ed.
I don't think the gender thing's important.
No.
I really don't. I think my observation, and this of course is after school, post-school days, is that bright boys and bright girls will do all right whether they're in a one-sex school or a two-sex school. I don't think that's important. And if they decided in 1978 that there was only going to be one selective high school in Newcastle, and it was going to be for boys and girls, I'd have said good-o.
But then I also know from listening to your story that it's not necessarily bright boys, but excuse me if I say it, but someone like yourself who needed that bit of direction, this was the school for you, and that's what your mother knew.
Yeah. See, I think with due humility, I think I can say that I'm a fairly intelligent person. And so even though I was lazy, and even though I was not very well directed as a schoolboy, I'm still...
But you were still kept on the straight and narrow and given the background and that feeling inside to achieve and do the right thing.
Quite right, yep.
Is there any comments or statements in relation to Newcastle Boys High School that you would like to add that we haven't covered in this interview? Is there anybody else, like a person that we haven't spoken about that you'd just like to remember, or?
Well, I'll tell you a funny little story rather, because that
doesn't have to be serious.
But it's perfectly true and deals with the Newcastle Boys High boy who did very well.
Okay.
And that is, I mentioned to you just a little while ago that I came up from Melbourne to go to my first Boys High dinner.
Yes.
And during the course of my career, I got the Order of Australia, and member of the Order of Australia. So I was wearing the little gold button in my lapel.
Yeah.
And while I was standing there, looking around and wondering who all these people were, a man came up to me and said, "Oh, you've got the member of the Order of Australia. What did you get that for?" And so I told him what I thought I got it for. And we talked on about this and that. And then he suddenly said to me, "Don't you know who I am?" And I did the old business. Oh, of course, look, I just can't put the name to the face. I'm sure I recognise you, but he said, "I'm the Lord Mayor of Newcastle." And this was
John McNaughton?
John McNaughton, thank you. And I laughed, of course, immediately at that. And he was a few years behind me at school. I think he was probably he wasn't at the school when I was at school. He might have been 10 years behind me.
Yeah, but you expected to know him.
I was expected to know him. And I think if I'd been the Lord Mayor of Newcastle, I'd have expected to be recognised too.
Well, it was nice he came and talked to you about your Order of Australia, and that was a fabulous thing.
Yeah.
But thank you. I'm just going to turn